In December of 2017, three core members of the Harmony Hills Church Choir disappeared during a routine evening practice. Their cars were found in the church parking lot, but no trace of the singers. 7 years later, a construction crew breaking ground for a new shopping mall makes a discovery that will force the lone survivor to confront a truth more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Sarah Chen watched the bulldozers tear through the frozen earth where the old Riverside Motel had once stood. At 32, she carried herself with the careful posture of someone who'd learned to expect bad news. Her breath formed small clouds in the December air as she gripped her coffee cup with white knuckles. 7 years since Pastor David, Mrs. Patterson, and Amy Martinez had vanished after Tuesday evening choir practice. Sarah had left early that night, a migraine that wouldn't quit, and returned the next morning to find their cars still in the parking lot, the church doors unlocked, music scattered across the floor. "Ma'am, you need to step back." The construction foreman approached, his expression apologetic but firm. "We hit something unexpected about an hour ago." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What kind of something?" The man glanced toward his crew, who were clustered around a section of exposed concrete. Old motel had some kind of basement storage area. "But there's personal belongings down there. Recent stuff." The coffee cup slipped from Sarah's fingers, ceramic exploding against the frozen ground. "What kind of belongings?" "Clothes, books, medication bottles, stuff that's definitely not from when this place was operating." He studied her face. "You okay, ma'am? You look like you know something about this." Sarah felt her world tilting. The Riverside Motel had been closed for 15 years, a relic from when the highway bypass was the main route through town. But it was only 3 blocks from Harmony Hills Church, close enough for someone to walk between the two locations without being noticed. She was already pulling out her phone, dialing Detective Ray Morrison's number. He'd been the lead investigator on the missing persons case, a methodical cop who'd never quite believed the theory that 3 adults had simply decided to abandon their lives simultaneously. "Morris, Ray, it's Sarah. They found something at the old Riverside Motel site." "What kind of something?" "Personal belongings. Underground. Recent ones." A pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't let them excavate any further until I arrive." The Riverside Motel had been a fixture on Highway 9 for decades before the new interstate made it obsolete. Sarah remembered it from childhood, a U-shaped collection of rooms surrounding a small courtyard, with the kind of neon sign that promised clean beds and reasonable rate. The building had been demolished 5 years ago to make way for the shopping development, but apparently the underground storage areas had remained. Detective Morrison arrived with a forensics team and enough yellow tape to cordon off half the construction site. The excavation revealed a concrete-lined space beneath what had been the motel's office building, probably an old fallout shelter from the 1960s that had been converted to storage. "It's bigger than we thought," the forensics tech reported, lowering a camera into the opening. "Looks like someone turned this into living quarters. Basic furnishings, sleeping areas, storage, and there's evidence of recent occupation." Morrison turned to Sarah. "You said you left choir practice early that night. What time?" "Around 8:30. I had a splitting headache." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself against the December cold. "When I came back the next morning to pick up music I'd forgotten. Their cars were still there, but the building was empty. Any indication they'd been planning to meet with someone? Any new faces around the church recently?" Sarah started to shake her head, then stopped. "Actually, yeah. There was a man who'd been attending services for a few weeks before they disappeared. Marcus something. Said he was interested in the church's history. Asked a lot of questions about the property." Morrison made notes. "Remember anything else about him? Well-dressed, professional. Said he was in real estate development, but he seemed more interested in the neighborhood than the church itself. Asked about traffic patterns, zoning regulations, that sort of thing." "What did this Marcus look like?" "Mid-40s, maybe. Expensive suit. Drove a nice car. The kind of guy who looked like he had money." Sarah frowned, trying to recall details. "He seemed particularly interested in our evening practice schedule. Asked, when the building was empty, when people came and went. Morrison's radio crackled with an update from the scene below. "Detective, you need to see this. We found evidence that people were definitely living down here, and recently, the descent into the underground space required safety equipment and careful navigation. The concrete chamber was approximately 15 by 30 feet, much larger than a typical storage room. Someone had installed basic electrical wiring, probably tapping into the motel's old power supply before the building was demolished. But it was the personal items that made Morrison's blood run cold. 3 sleeping areas were arranged against one wall, each with carefully organized belongings. Pastor David's reading glasses and Bible, Mrs. Patterson's knitting supplies and medication bottles with current prescription dates, Amy's college textbooks and laptop computer showing recent activity. "They were living here," Sarah whispered, examining Amy's belongings. "But why, and where are they now?" Morrison was studying a stack of papers on a makeshift table: legal documents, property surveys, financial records, all related to various real estate transactions in the area, including the motel property itself. "Sarah, look at this." Morrison held up a purchase contract. "The Riverside Motel was bought 6 months after your friends disappeared, purchased by Meadowbrook Development LLC for significantly below the assessed value. The same company that's building the shopping mall. Gets better. The seller was the city, which had seized the property for unpaid taxes. But according this paperwork, those tax payments had been current until December 2017. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. Someone made sure the motel went into tax default. That's what it looks like. But Sarah, if this Marcus guy killed them, why keep all this stuff? And why set up living quarters in a condemned building? Morrison's question was answered by a discovery in a locked filing cabinet that forensics managed to open. Inside were detailed surveillance records, photographs of the 3 choir members, their daily routines, their schedules, their financial situations, and most disturbing of all, handwritten notes planning their abduction. "Tuesday evening practice, 8:45 p.m. Morrison read aloud. 3 targets isolated in church building. Chen subject leaves early due to medical issue, monitored through church communications. Optimal window for extraction, 9:10:15 p.m. Sarah stared at the surveillance photos of her friends. "He'd been watching us for weeks, months. These photos go back to early 2017. Morrison flipped through the file. "Sarah, this is evidence of premeditated kidnapping. But if he grabbed them 7 years ago, where the hell are they now?" The answer came from forensics analysis of the living quarters. Based on wear patterns, food residue, and other indicators, the space had been occupied intermittently over several years, with the most recent occupation ending approximately 6 months ago. "Someone was using this place as a way station," the tech reported. "People stayed here for periods of weeks or months, then moved on. Most recent occupation ended around when construction started on the mall." Morrison studied the timeline. The choir members had disappeared in December. The motel property had been purchased by Meadowbrook Development in mid-2018. Construction on the shopping mall had begun in late. That suggested the underground space had been used as some kind of temporary housing for years before being abandoned, when the development project made the location too visible. "He kept them here while he established control," Morrison concluded, "then moved them somewhere more permanent once he was sure they wouldn't try to escape." The answer came in the form of a phone call to Morrison's direct line. The caller ID showed M. Webb. "Detective Morrison." Marcus Webb's voice was calm, professional. "I believe you're investigating some property I own. Mr. Webb, we need to speak with you immediately about 3 missing persons. I think you mean 3 employees who chose alternative living arrangements," Webb interrupted smoothly. "Though I suppose employment law can be complicated." Morrison signaled for the call to be traced. "Where are Pastor David, Mrs. Patterson, and Amy Martinez?" "Working, earning excellent wages for their consulting services, and exactly where they chose to be after I explained their employment options." "Kidnapping is not employment, Mr. Webb," Webb laughed. Detective, you clearly don't understand the situation. These people were facing serious financial difficulties when I offered them a solution. Pastor David was behind on his mortgage. Mrs. Patterson couldn't afford her medical treatments. Amy was drowning in student loan debt. I offered them a way out. Morrison looked at Sarah, who was listening to the conversation with growing horror. What kind of way out involves disappearing for 7 years? The kind that pays exceptionally well for specialized local knowledge. They've been helping me understand community dynamics in various markets. Very valuable consultants, really. Sarah grabbed Morrison's phone. Marcus, this is Sarah Chen. Where are my friends? Sarah, I was wondering when you'd get involved. Your friends have been asking about you. Webb's tone became warmer, more manipulative. They're at a secure facility where they can work without distractions. Very productive environment, I assure you. Let me talk to them. Of course. In fact, I think it's time for a reunion. You see, Sarah, there's been one missing piece in my business arrangement with your friends. They've been asking for you to join their consulting team. Morrison tried to grab the phone back, but Sarah held on. What kind of community outreach, local relations, stakeholder management? Your friends have been quite effective at helping me understand how to approach development projects in small communities. Pastor David especially has insights into how religious communities make decisions about property sales. Sarah felt sick. You've been using them to help you manipulate other churches. I've been compensating them generously for their expertise in community engagement. Local voices are so much more persuasive than outside developers when it comes to explaining the benefits of economic development. Morrison finally regained control of his phone. Webb, this conversation is over. We're issuing a warrant for your arrest on charges of kidnapping and extortion. Good luck with that, detective. You'll find it difficult to prosecute kidnapping when the alleged victims are willing to testify that they voluntarily accepted lucrative consulting contracts. The line went dead. Morrison immediately contacted the FBI while Sarah stared at the underground chamber where her friends had apparently been held for months or years after their disappearance. Ray, they're alive. After 7 years, they're still alive. If we can believe Webb, this could all be psychological manipulation. But Sarah was studying the personal belongings again, noting details she'd missed before. Amy's laptop showed recent document activity. Mrs. Patterson's medication bottles had prescription dates from just months ago. Pastor David's Bible contained new bookmarks and annotations. No, they're alive, and Webb's been using them to run advance operations on other communities. That's how he's been acquiring properties so efficiently. He has local religious and community leaders helping him identify targets and build trust. Morrison's phone rang again. FBI agent Jennifer Liu introduced herself and requested immediate coordination on what appeared to be a multi-state organized crime operation. We've been tracking Marcus Webb and Meadowbrook Development for 2 years, Agent Liu explained. Suspicious property acquisitions in 6 states, always preceded by the mysterious disappearance of local opposition leaders. But we've never had direct evidence linking him to the disappearances until now. How many people are we talking about? Morrison asked. 5 confirmed cases across different states. Small-town pastors, community activists, a historical preservation advocate. All people who might organize effective opposition to large-scale development projects. Sarah felt the scope of the horror expanding. It's not just about my friend. It's about systematically removing anyone who might interfere with his business model. Exactly. And based on what you found in that underground facility, Webb's been using your friends to identify and approach new targets. Religious communities especially trust recommendations from other clergy. Morrison studied the surveillance photos again. So what's the end game? Does he eventually release them? Agent Liu's expression was grim. Our analysis suggests he relocates them periodically to different markets, uses them for different projects, keeps them financially dependent and geographically isolated from their original communities. A traveling workforce of kidnapped consultants. It's sophisticated human trafficking disguised as employment, and nearly impossible to prosecute because the victims appear to be participating willingly in lucrative business arrangements. Sarah looked around the underground chamber one more time, imagining her friends living here in secret while Webb used their religious credentials to deceive other communities. "We have to find them," she said quietly. "They've been trapped in this man's operation for 7 years. They probably don't even understand what's been done to them anymore." Morrison was already coordinating with the FBI task force, but as they prepared to leave the underground chamber, Sarah noticed something that made her blood freeze. On the makeshift table where the legal documents had been found, someone had left a recent newspaper folded to the real estate section. Circled in red ink was a small article about several rural churches in the next county that were struggling with declining membership and considering selling their properties. The article was dated 3 days ago. Marcus Webb was still operating, still targeting new communities. And somewhere, her 3 friends were probably helping him plan his next acquisition. The FBI surveillance operation at the Meadowbrook development offices revealed that Marcus Webb had anticipated their investigation. Security cameras showed him removing files and computer equipment hours before the search warrant was executed. His personal residence was similarly cleaned out, with neighbors reporting moving trucks the previous evening. "He's been planning his exit strategy for months," Agent Lou briefed Morrison and Sarah at the federal building. Probably triggered by the construction discovery. He knew eventually someone would find that underground chamber. Sarah studied surveillance photos of Webb's offices. "But he called you directly, Ray. He wanted to talk. That doesn't sound like someone who's run. It sounds like someone who's setting up the final phase of his operation," Morrison replied grimly. Agent Lou pulled up a map showing Webb's known properties across 6 states. "We've been tracking his path. He operates in small communities, identifies valuable development opportunities, eliminates local opposition, acquires property at below-market prices, then moves on to the next target, always leaving behind a trail of missing persons cases that never get solved," Morrison added. "Until now, Sarah, your early departure from choir practice 7 years ago was the first time one of his operations didn't go perfectly. You were the witness he couldn't control." Sarah felt the weight of that realization. So he's been waiting 7 years for a chance to complete the job. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your friends miss you, Sarah. They're waiting at the old Miller farm on Route 47. Come alone if you want to see them again." Morrison immediately began coordinating a response, but Agent Lou raised concerns about tactical approach. If Webb really has been using these people as willing consultants for 7 years, a heavy law enforcement presence might cause them to protect their captor. Stockholm Syndrome is common in long-term abduction cases. Sarah studied the map on Lou's computer. "The Miller farm. I know that property. It was scheduled for development 2 years ago, but the project was canceled when the family refused to sell. And now the family's gone. They moved away suddenly last spring. Said they'd gotten a better offer from a private buyer." Morrison felt the familiar chill of recognizing a pattern. Webb's been operating right under our noses this entire time. Agent Lou was already pulling property records. Miller Farm was purchased 6 months ago by a subsidiary of Meadowbrook Develop. Purchase price was significantly above market value. Because the previous opposition had been eliminated, Sarah concluded. "Sarah, you can't go there," Morrison said firmly. "This is obviously a trap." "Of course it's a trap, but it's also our only chance to find my friends before Webb disappears with them permanently." Agent Lou studied tactical maps of the Miller property. Remote location, multiple buildings, plenty of places to hide hostages or stage an ambush. "We'd need significant resources to secure that much territory. Resources that would be visible from miles away," Morrison added. "Webb would see us coming and either run or eliminate the witnesses." Sarah felt the familiar frustration of being one step behind a sophisticated criminal. "So what do we do? Let him disappear with 3 kidnapped people?" "We do exactly what he expects," Agent Lou said slowly. "You go to the farm, but not alone." The plan that emerged was risky but elegant. Sarah would approach the Miller farm alone, as Webb had demanded, but wearing concealed surveillance equipment that would allow the FBI to monitor the situation and coordinate response. If Webb really did have the missing choir members, They needed proof of life before moving in with tactical teams. Remember, Agent Lou briefed Sarah as technicians fitted her with nearly invisible cameras and audio transmitters. Your job is to confirm that Pastor David, Miss Patterson, and Amy are alive and locate their exact position. Don't try to be a hero. We'll be listening to everything. Morrison pulled Sarah aside as they prepared to leave. Sarah, I want you to understand something. If Webb has kept these people for 7 years, they may not be the same people you remember. Long-term captivity changes people in ways that aren't always obvious. You think they'll be hostile to rescue attempts. I think they'll be confused, possibly protective of their captor, maybe even afraid of the outside world. Don't take anything personally. The Miller farm sat on 50 acres of rolling hills 20 miles outside town. The main house was a sprawling Victorian that had seen better days, with several outbuildings scattered across the property. Sarah parked at the main gate and walked up the long gravel driveway, her heart pounding despite the FBI team's reassurances that they were monitoring her every step. Marcus Webb met her on the front porch, looking exactly as she remembered. Expensive clothes, professional demeanor, the kind of confident smile that suggested he was accustomed to getting what he wanted. Sarah, thank you for coming. Your friends are going to be so happy to see you. Where are they? Inside, they've been working on a very important project, and they specifically requested your input. Webb gestured toward the front door. The house's interior had been extensively modified, with walls removed to create large open spaces filled with drafting tables, computers, and architectural equipment. And working at those tables with the focused concentration of people absorbed in meaningful tasks were Pastor David, Miss Patterson, and Amy Martinez. They looked older, thinner, with the pallor of people who spent most of their time indoors. But they were alive, and they looked up with genuine joy when Sarah entered. Sarah. Amy jumped up and embraced her, tears streaming down her face. We've been waiting so long for you to join us. Pastor David approached more cautiously, his expression mixing happiness with something that might have been guilt. Sarah, there's so much we need to explain to you. Mrs. Patterson remained at her workstation but smiled warmly. Dear, you look wonderful. We've been following your career through the newspapers. Still teaching music? Sarah fought back her own tears as she looked at her friends. They seemed genuinely happy to see her, but there was something wrong with their responses, too controlled, too scripted, as if they'd been coached on what to say. I thought you were dead, Sarah said simply. All of you. For 7 years. We couldn't contact you, Pastor David explained. It would have compromised the work we're doing here. What kind of work requires you to disappear for 7 years? Webb interrupted before anyone could answer. Sarah, let me show you what your friends have been accomplishing. I think you'll be as excited as they are about the opportunities we can create together. What followed was a presentation that was both impressive and horrifying. Over 7 years, Pastor David, Miss Patterson, and Amy had helped Webb identify and acquire dozens of properties across multiple states. Using their religious credentials and community connections, they'd convinced churches, historical societies, and community groups to sell valuable land at below-market prices. The beauty of the system, Webb explained, is that people trust local voices more than outside developers. When Pastor David explains that selling to my company will bring economic development to their community, they listen. You've been using them as con artists. I've been using them as consultants. They're very well compensated for their expertise. Sarah looked at her friends, trying to understand their apparent acceptance of the situation. David, you're a pastor. How do you justify lying to other churches? Pastor David's expression grew earnest. Sarah, we're not lying. We're helping communities understand economic realities they might otherwise ignore. These small towns were dying anyway. Our work helps them transition to something more sustainable, by tricking them into selling their property for less than it's worth, by helping them make informed decisions about their future. Sarah realized that 7 years of isolation and manipulation had genuinely convinced her friends that they were doing good work. Webb hadn't needed to use force or threats. He'd simply provided them with a rationalization framework that allowed them to feel virtuous about their participation in his schemes. What happens now? Sarah asked. Do I join your consulting firm? Webb smiled. That's entirely up to you, Sarah. But I should mention that your friends have expressed some concerns about your ability to adjust to our working arrangements. What kind of concerns? Amy spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. Sarah, you've always been impulsive, quick to judge situations before understanding all the complexities. We're worried that you might not appreciate the importance of what we're doing here. Mrs. Patterson nodded agreement. And you've never been good at keeping secrets, dear. This work requires absolute discretion. Sarah felt a chill as she realized what was happening. Webb had spent years conditioning her friends to view outsiders, including her, as potential threats to their mission. They weren't going to help her escape. They were going to help him keep her prisoner. I need some time to think about this, Sarah said carefully, remembering Agent Liu's instructions to avoid confrontation. Of course, Webb replied. Take all the time you need. Your friends can show you to the guest quarters. As Pastor David led her toward a staircase, Sarah caught a glimpse of something that made her blood freeze. Through a window, she could see FBI tactical vehicles approaching the farm from multiple directions. Webb noticed her expression and smiled coldly. Your law enforcement friends are very predictable, Sarah. We've been monitoring their communications all afternoon. Before Sarah could react, Webb produced a pistol from inside his jacket. I'm afraid your consultation period will be shorter than expected. But instead of pointing the weapon at Sarah, Webb handed it to Pastor David. David, you know what needs to be done. Sarah represents everything we've worked 7 years to leave behind. Small-minded thinking, resistance to progress. She'll never understand the bigger picture. Sarah stared in horror as Pastor David accepted the weapon without hesitation. I'm sorry, Sarah, her former pastor said quietly. But some sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. As gunshots erupted from multiple directions outside the farmhouse, Sarah realized that rescuing people who had become willing accomplices to their own captor was the most dangerous kind of salvation imaginable. The Miller farm was about to become the final battlefield in a 7-year war between justice and sophisticated evil, and Sarah's own friends had chosen which side they were fighting for. The FBI tactical team breached the farmhouse just as Pastor David raised the pistol toward Sarah's chest, his face showing not anger or hatred, but the calm certainty of someone who believed he was doing God's work. The sound of breaking glass and shouted commands filled the air as 7 years of psychological manipulation collided with the violent reality of rescue operations that nobody really wanted. In the chaos that followed, Sarah understood that some victims of sophisticated criminals never truly escape their captivity, even after the prison doors are finally opened by outside force. The real question was whether Pastor David, Miss Patterson, and Amy Martinez could ever find their way back to the people they had been before Marcus Webb convinced them that disappearing was the same thing as being saved.